In the opulent Chen family dining room, Maya was about to face the cruelest Thanksgiving of her life. What started as a holiday homecoming took a shocking turn when they came face to face with their own prejudices. Maya Chen wasn't your typical architect's daughter. For 3 years, she had chosen authenticity over approval, known for her unwavering principles. When she encountered her family wearing her grandmother's simple ring, she had no idea she was walking into a calculated assault. Maya's quiet defense would lead to a revelation that shattered everything. What began as family dinner would become a reckoning with conditional love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The iron gates of the Chen estate loomed ahead, their ornate scrollwork catching the late afternoon sun. Maya's hands tightened on the steering wheel of her modest Honda Civic as the familiar weight of expectation settled on her chest. 3 years since she'd driven up this winding driveway, past manicured gardens that cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. "You okay?" David's voice was quiet, steady. His hand found hers on the gear shift, grounding her when everything else felt like shifting sand. "I will be." Maya's fingers unconsciously moved to the simple silver band on her ring finger, her grandmother's ring, worn smooth by decades of love and hard work. The metal was warm against her skin, a talisman against the storm she knew was coming. The house rose before them like a monument to success, all soaring columns and pristine marble. The entryway alone was larger than most people's homes, something her mother had boasted about when Maya was 12. Even then, the pride in Linda's voice had made something uncomfortable twist in Maya's stomach. They parked between a gleaming Mercedes and a Tesla. Maya caught David's slight smile as he took in the automotive display, but he said nothing. That was David, always observing, never judging aloud. It was one of the things she loved about him, this quiet way he had of seeing everything and revealing nothing until he chose to. The front door opened before they could knock. Linda Chen stood framed in the doorway, every inch the matriarch in her perfectly tailored cream suit and pearls that caught the light like small stars. Her smile was brilliant, practiced, the same one Maya had watched her deploy at countless charity galas. "Maya, darling." Linda's arms enveloped her daughter in a cloud of expensive perfume. The embrace lasted exactly the right amount of time, long enough to appear loving, brief enough to avoid disturbing Linda's makeup. "And you must be David." Linda's eyes swept over David with the efficiency of an appraiser, cataloging details: the off-the-rack suit, the absence of a luxury watch, the slightly scuffed shoes. David's calm smile never wavered as he extended his hand. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for having me." "Oh, please, call me Linda." But Maya heard the slight tension in her mother's voice, the way she held David's handshake just a beat too long, as if trying to read his worth through contact alone. The foyer was exactly as Maya remembered, a testament to wealth that bordered on obscene. The chandelier had been imported from Venice, the marble floors from Italy. Fresh orchids filled crystal vases, their blooms perfect and scentless. Everything beautiful, everything expensive, everything cold. "Maya!" Marcus appeared at the top of the curved staircase, his face lighting up with genuine joy. At 24, her younger brother had inherited their father's height and their mother's striking features, but his smile held none of Linda's calculation. He bounded down the stairs with unguarded energy. "Hey, stranger!" Maya's voice softened as Marcus swept her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. This was real, this warmth, this uncomplicated love. "And you're the famous David." Marcus turned his grin toward David, extending a hand. "I'm Marcus, the much better-looking sibling." "Maya warned me about your modesty," David replied, and Marcus laughed, a sound that echoed too loudly in the pristine space. "Where's your father?" Linda's voice cut through the moment, her eyes already scanning Maya's appearance with subtle disapproval. "Robert's in his study, naturally. And Vivian should be here any moment." Maya's stomach tightened at the mention of her aunt. If Linda was the velvet glove, Vivian was the iron fist, all sharp edges and cutting observations. Maya, darling, Linda's voice took on that particular tone, warm honey laced with acid. You look comfortable, very authentic. Her gaze lingered on Maya's simple black dress, then dropped to her hands. Maya watched her mother's smile falter, almost imperceptibly. That's an interesting choice. Linda's voice was carefully neutral. Your ring, it's very understated. The word hung in the air like a perfectly placed blade. Maya's hand instinctively closed, covering the simple silver band that had graced her grandmother's finger for 47 years of marriage. It was Grandma Rose's, Maya said quietly. Yes, I know. Linda's voice carried a note of pity. I just thought, well, for such a special occasion as an engagement. She let the sentence trail off, but the implication was clear. Surely Maya deserved better than a ring that probably cost less than Linda's monthly manicure budget. David's hand found the small of Maya's back, a gesture so subtle that only she would notice. But the support it offered was infinite. It's beautiful, David said simply, his voice carrying quiet conviction. The most beautiful ring I've ever seen. Linda's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Sentimental value. How lovely. The front door chimed, and Vivian Chen swept in like a storm dressed in designer labels. At 52, she had perfected the art of making an entrance. Her eyes found Maya immediately, scanning her from head to toe with prosecutorial precision. Maya, sweet pea. Vivian's voice dripped false warmth as she air-kissed her niece's cheeks. Don't you look natural? And this must be the mysterious man we've heard absolutely nothing about. There it was, the first direct hit. Maya felt David's slight stiffening beside her, but his expression remained pleasantly neutral. David Kim, he said, extending his hand to Vivian. Kim, Vivian repeated, as if tasting the name. And what is it you do, David? I work in tech, consulting mostly. How? Modern. Vivian's smile could have cut glass. The tech industry is so volatile, isn't it? Here one day, gone the next. Robert Chen emerged from his study, and Maya felt her heart clench with familiar affection. Her father looked older, more silver at his temples, new lines around his eyes. But his smile was genuine, unguarded in a way that reminded her of the man who had built sandcastles with her on rare family vacations. Maya, his voice was warm as he pulled her into a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and old leather. We've missed you. The words hit harder than any criticism could have. Because they were true, and they made everything more complicated than Maya wanted it to be. After introductions and polite conversation about David's practical work, Linda suggested they get settled before dinner. Maya announced they were staying at the inn in town. Another miscalculation in her family's eyes, choosing independence over free luxury. It wasn't until they were back in the car, the estate gates closing behind them, that Maya allowed herself to breathe fully. They think you're broke, she said. I know. David's smile was enigmatic. Interesting, isn't it? How quickly people show you who they really are when they think you can't do anything for them. At the inn, Maya stood at their window, watching sunset paint the peaks in shades of gold. David's arms encircled her waist. Tell me about her, he said softly. Your grandmother. Maya smiled, the first genuine smile since arriving. She came here with nothing but the clothes on her back. She and Grandpa worked multiple jobs, put each other through school, saved for 2 years to buy her engagement ring. She turned the ring around her finger. It's not worth much, maybe $200, but she wore it every day for 47 years. What did she say when she gave it to you? Maya closed her eyes, hearing Rose's voice clearly. Love isn't about what someone can give you. It's about what you can build together. This ring has been part of 47 years of real partnership. I want you to have it when you find someone who understands that. And you knew I understood. I knew. Maya turned in his arms. That's why I chose this ring, David. Because what we have is real. David's kiss was soft, reverent. When they broke apart, Maya felt steadier. "Ready to go back?" David asked. Maya looked once more at the mountains, drawing strength from their ancient permanence. "Ready?" But as they drove back toward the estate, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something that would change everything. The ring caught the last light of sunset, its simple silver surface reflecting back all the complexity of the choice she'd made, to love and be loved for who she truly was. Tonight would prove whether that choice had been brave or foolish. The evening light was fading as Maya and David returned to the Chen estate, its windows glowing like amber jewels against the darkening sky. Maya's stomach churned as they approached the front door, knowing that the polite veneer of their earlier meeting would soon give way to the real interrogation. Linda greeted them in the living room, a space that could have graced the pages of Architectural Digest. Everything was positioned with mathematical precision: the silk cushions, the imported vases, the original artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. A crystal decanter of what Maya recognized as her father's 30-year-old scotch sat on the mahogany bar, surrounded by glasses that caught the light like tiny prisons. "Perfect timing," Linda said, her smile sharp as cut crystal. "I was just telling Marcus about the Weatherby's daughter. You remember Sarah? She just got engaged to that lovely investment banker. The ring is absolutely stunning. 5 carats, I believe. Cartier setting." Maya felt David's hand briefly touch her back, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in this carefully orchestrated minefield. "How nice for Sarah," Maya said evenly, accepting the glass of wine her mother offered. The vintage was undoubtedly expensive, chosen specifically to demonstrate the family's refined taste. Vivian emerged from the powder room, having freshened her already flawless makeup. She'd changed into a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, and her jewelry sparkled with the kind of understated elegance that screamed money to those who knew how to read the signs. "David, darling," Vivian said, settling into her chair with practiced grace, "I'm absolutely fascinated by your work. Technology consulting? How wonderfully modern. Tell me, what exactly does that entail? Do you fix people's computers when they break?" Maya's jaw tightened at the condescension dripping from her aunt's voice, but David's expression remained pleasantly neutral. He'd dealt with this kind of attitude before, she realized. People who assumed that anyone not immediately recognizable as wealthy must be insignificant. "I help companies optimize their systems," David replied simply. "Streamline operations, improve efficiency. Mostly back-end work that most people never see." "Back-end work," Vivian repeated, as if the words tasted sour. "How technical. And I suppose that keeps you quite busy, traveling to all sorts of little companies?" "Some travel, yes, though much of what I do can be handled remotely these days." Robert entered the room carrying his own glass of scotch, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Where the women's attacks were surgical strikes, Robert's approach would be more direct, businessman to businessman. "Remote work," Robert mused, settling into his leather armchair. "Convenient, I'm sure, though there's something to be said for face-to-face meetings. Building real relationships. That's how fortunes are made. Knowing the right people, being in the right rooms." "Dad built this company from nothing," Marcus interjected, pride evident in his voice. "Started with a single property and turned it into one of the largest real estate empires on the West Coast." "Impressive," David said, and Maya caught the slight emphasis on the word. Not dismissive, but not awed either. It was the tone of someone who understood business success but wasn't intimidated by it. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. She was used to people being more obviously impressed by the family's achievements. "And what about your family, David? Are they in technology as well?" "My parents owned a small restaurant," David said simply. "They worked very hard to give me opportunities they never had." The past tense hung in the air, heavy with implication. Maya knew the story, how David's parents had sacrificed everything to put him through school, how they'd died in a car accident just months before his first company went public. The guilt he carried about their never seeing his success was something they'd talked about in quiet moments, when his usual composure cracked just enough to reveal the pain beneath. "A restaurant," Vivian said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How quaint. I suppose that explains your appreciation for simple things." Her gaze dropped pointedly to Maya's ring. Actually, Maya said, her voice carrying a warning edge, David appreciates authentic things. Things with real meaning. Of course, darling, Linda interjected quickly, sensing the tension. We all value authenticity, though it's also important to consider practicalities. A woman's engagement ring is something she'll wear for the rest of her life. It should reflect her status, her achievements, the respect she deserves. The words landed like carefully aimed arrows. Maya felt each one find its mark, designed to make her question her choices, to feel embarrassed about the simple silver band that meant more to her than any diamond ever could. Like the Weatherby's daughter, Vivian added helpfully. 5 carats really makes a statement, doesn't it? Shows that a man values his woman enough to invest properly in her future. Maya's fingers tightened around her wine glass. The implication was clear, that David didn't value her enough, didn't invest properly, didn't understand what she deserved. It was a masterful attack, wrapped in concern for her well-being. Maya's ring is perfect, David said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. It represents something real, something lasting. Oh, we know it has sentimental value, Linda said, waving her hand dismissively. But sentiment doesn't really endure, does it? When the honeymoon phase ends, when real life sets in, a woman needs something substantial. Something that reflects her worth in concrete terms. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, maybe we should. Let the adults talk, Marcus, Vivian cut him off smoothly. This is important. Maya needs to understand what she's getting into. Marriage is a partnership, yes, but it's also a business arrangement. A woman needs security. Like you had. The words slipped out before Maya could stop them, sharp and cutting. Vivian's face went white, then flushed red. Her divorce had been messy, public, and financially devastating. It was a wound that had never properly healed, and Maya had just pressed directly on it. That's different, Vivian said, her voice tight with controlled fury. I was naive. I trusted too easily. I thought love was enough. I learned the hard way that a woman needs to protect herself. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Maya realized she'd crossed a line, let her aunt's cruelty provoke her into cruelty of her own. But she couldn't bring herself to apologize, not when Vivian was so systematically trying to destroy her happiness. Robert cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Perhaps we should discuss something else. Maya, tell us about your latest project. That sustainable development you mentioned? Maya seized the lifeline gratefully. It's a mixed-use complex, designed to be carbon neutral. Solar panels, rainwater collection, native landscaping. The goal is to prove that environmentally conscious design can also be profitable. Profitable, Linda repeated, as if the word was foreign. And is it? Profitable, I mean. It will be. The long-term savings in energy costs alone will… Long-term, Vivian interrupted. How wonderfully optimistic. Though I suppose when you're working with smaller budgets, longer timelines are necessary. Another perfectly placed barb. Every project Maya took on was implicitly criticized as small-scale, idealistic, financially questionable. Her family's inability to see the value in what she was building felt like a physical weight on her chest. The soft chime of the dinner bell saved her from having to respond. Linda rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. Shall we go in? I've prepared all of Maya's favorites, though I suppose tastes change over time, don't they? What we once thought was sufficient can seem inadequate as we mature. As they moved toward the dining room, Maya caught David's eye. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. He was keeping careful mental notes of every slight, every subtle cruelty. Maya touched her grandmother's ring, drawing strength from its simple presence. Rose had weathered far worse storms than this: poverty, discrimination, the death of a child. She'd done it with grace and dignity, never compromising her values for the sake of others' approval. The dining room awaited, formal and imposing, set with china that had been in the family for generations. Maya steeled herself for what was to come, knowing that dinner would bring even sharper attacks, more pointed questions. But she wasn't alone. David walked beside her, his quiet strength, a reminder that real love didn't need to prove itself with price tags or status symbols. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The dining room stretched before them like a battlefield, dressed for a state dinner. Crystal stemware caught the light from the imported chandelier, casting prismatic rainbows across walls lined with oil paintings of Chen family ancestors, stern-faced men and women who had built their fortunes through shrewd business deals and strategic marriages. The mahogany table could seat 20, but tonight only 6 place settings marked their positions in what Maya was beginning to recognize as a carefully orchestrated campaign. Linda had outdone herself. The centerpiece was an arrangement of white orchids and autumn leaves that probably cost more than most families spent on their entire Thanksgiving dinner. The china bore the Chen family crest, a reminder to everyone present of legacy, tradition, and the weight of family expectations. Each course would be served on plates worth more than David supposedly earned in a month. "Maya, you're here, of course," Linda directed, gesturing to the seat to Robert's right. "And David, you're across from her." The seating arrangement was strategic. Maya positioned within the family circle, David placed where he could be more easily observed and questioned from multiple angles. Robert stood to deliver what had once been Maya's favorite family tradition, his Thanksgiving toast. She remembered being small, watching her father's face light up as he spoke about gratitude and family bonds. But as he raised his glass tonight, something felt different, performative, rather than heartfelt. "To family," Robert began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of countless business presentations. "To the blessings we've built together, and to new additions who help us appreciate what we have." His eyes found David's across the table. "We're grateful for this opportunity to get to know you better, David. To understand what draws you to our Maya." The words sounded welcoming, but Maya heard the subtext, a polite interrogation disguised as gratitude. David raised his glass with a slight nod, his expression pleasantly neutral despite the undercurrent of evaluation in Robert's words. "And to Maya," Robert continued, his voice softening genuinely for the first time, "welcome home, sweetheart. We've missed having you at this table." Maya felt her throat tighten. This was the father she remembered, the one who'd taught her to ride a bicycle and helped with algebra homework. For a moment she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this evening could be different. But as they settled into their seats and the first course arrived, a delicate butternut squash soup garnished with truffle oil, Linda's voice cut through any illusion of peace. "I was telling Mrs. Patterson about you just last week, Maya. She was asking about your ring. I'd mentioned your engagement at the country club." Linda's spoon moved through her soup with surgical precision. "I had to explain that you'd chosen something more understated, sentimental, rather than traditional." The word sentimental dripped with the same dismissive tone one might use for a child's imaginary friend. Maya felt David's eyes on her across the table, steady and supportive, but the familiar ache of family disappointment settled in her chest like a stone. "Traditions can be overrated," David said quietly. "Sometimes the most meaningful choices are the ones that break from expectation." Vivian's laugh was like crystal breaking. "How refreshingly idealistic, though I suppose when resources are limited, one has to find creative ways to frame things positively." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. David's limited resources, Maya's settling for less. The narrative they were constructing was so complete, so confidently delivered, that Maya almost found herself believing it despite knowing better. "Actually," Maya said, her voice carefully controlled, "this ring has more meaning than any store-bought diamond could have. It represents 47 years of genuine partnership, of building something real together." 47 years, Linda repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, your grandmother was very practical." Living through the depression, I suppose one learns to make do with what's available. She paused delicately. Though we live in different times now, don't we? A woman has more options, more opportunities to choose what truly reflects her worth. The servers moved silently around the table, replacing soup bowls with the main course herb-crusted lamb that probably cost more per plate than David's supposed weekly salary. Maya watched her family cutting into their meat with the same precision they applied to cutting down her choices. Speaking of worth, Vivian said, her knife gliding through lamb with surgical expertise. I was at lunch with Margaret Steinberg yesterday. You remember the Steinbergs? They own that lovely vineyard in Sonoma. Their daughter just got engaged to a tech entrepreneur. Charming boy, very successful. Started his own company fresh out of Stanford. Her eyes found David's. Margaret said the ring was absolutely stunning. Vintage Tiffany setting, 3 carats. Though I suppose not everyone in tech reaches that level of success. Maya's hand tightened around her fork. The comparison was deliberate, surgical. Another tech entrepreneur, another ring, another example of what Maya supposedly deserved but wasn't receiving. The Steinberg boy has vision, Robert added, oblivious to or ignoring the cruelty of the conversation. Artificial intelligence applications for supply chain management. Margaret says his company is already valued at over $50 million. Now that's the kind of innovation that builds lasting wealth. $50 million, Marcus repeated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction but unable to redirect it. That's impressive. David continued eating methodically, but Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes. She knew he was calculating. Not just the obvious insults, but the pattern they revealed. Her family wasn't just dismissing him. They were teaching her to dismiss him, to see him as inadequate by their standards. Innovation comes in many forms, David said simply. Not all of it gets valued the same way by the market immediately. True, Vivian conceded with false magnanimity. Though eventually the market sorts out what has real value and what's just potential. Her gaze dropped again to Maya's ring. Distinguishes between substance and sentiment. The word sentiment had become their weapon of choice, wielded with increasing frequency and precision. Everything meaningful in Maya's life was being reframed as merely sentimental. Her career choices, her ring, implicitly her choice in David himself. Sometimes sentiment is the most substantial thing there is, Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. Sometimes it's the only thing that lasts when everything else falls apart. Linda's smile was patient, the kind reserved for children who needed to learn difficult truths. Of course, darling, but you're building a life now. A future. Sentiment is lovely for anniversaries and scrapbooks, but practical considerations matter too. Security matters. The conversation continued around the table like a carefully choreographed dance, each family member taking their turn to chip away at Maya's confidence, to plant seeds of doubt about her choices. The lamb grew cold on Maya's plate as she found herself defending decisions she'd been proud of just hours earlier. David remained largely quiet, answering direct questions with polite brevity, but Maya could see him cataloging each slight, each subtle cruelty. His jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, and she recognized the signs of someone maintaining careful control over growing anger. As the servers cleared the main course, preparing to bring dessert, Vivian leaned back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone preparing to deliver a final blow. You know, Maya, she said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of poisoned honey. I've been thinking about what your grandmother would say if she could see you now. Rose was practical above all else. She understood that love, real love, means ensuring someone is properly taken care of. Maya's breath caught. Using Rose's memory as a weapon was crossing a line that even Vivian had never crossed before. But her aunt wasn't finished. I think she'd be concerned, honestly, about whether you're truly being valued the way you deserve. Whether you're settling for less than you're worth because you've confused romantic notions with practical reality. The words hit like a physical blow. Maya felt something crack inside her chest, the careful composure she'd maintained all evening finally beginning to fracture. Around the table, she could see her family watching, waiting to see how she would respond to this perfectly calibrated cruelty. David's fork had stopped moving. For the first time all evening, his pleasant mask slipped just enough to reveal the steel beneath. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as dessert approached, and Maya realized they were rapidly approaching the moment when polite warfare would become something far more dangerous. The silence that followed Vivian's words was thick enough to cut. Maya stared across the table at her aunt, feeling as if she'd been slapped. Using her grandmother's memory, the one person in this family who had truly understood love, as ammunition against her, was a cruelty so profound that for a moment, Maya couldn't breathe. David's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down with deliberate control. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet, and Maya caught the way his jaw had tightened, the careful stillness that suggested barely leashed anger. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you just say?" Vivian had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, as if she recognized she might have pushed too far. But her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I said your grandmother was practical, Maya. She understood that a woman needs security." "Don't." The word came out sharper than Maya intended, cutting through Vivian's explanation like a blade. "Don't you dare speak for her. You barely knew her." "Maya," Linda's voice carried a warning tone. "Vivian is just concerned." "Concerned?" Maya's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "She just suggested that Grandma Rose would disapprove of David, of my choices, of everything I've built." "That's not concern, Mom. That's cruelty." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his discomfort with confrontation evident in every line of his body. "Let's not." "No, Dad. We're going to talk about this." Maya's composure was unraveling like a thread pulled too hard. 3 years of distance, 3 years of hoping her family might change, might see her as an adult capable of making her own decisions, all of it crashing down in this moment. "You want to know what Grandma Rose would think? She'd be horrified at how you're treating the man I love." Vivian's eyes glittered with something that might have been satisfaction. She'd drawn blood and knew it. "The man you love, who can't even afford to buy you a proper ring?" "Maya, sweet pea, love is wonderful, but it doesn't pay bills. It doesn't provide security. Look around you. Look at what your parents built, what they can offer you. And you're throwing it away for what? For someone who works on other people's computers?" Quote, "You've been attacking my relationship all evening, questioning David's worth, questioning my judgment, using my dead grandmother as a weapon against me. And why? Because you can't stand that I might actually be happy." Maya was standing now, her whole body trembling with emotion. Around the table, her family sat frozen, Robert looking agonized, Linda calculating, Marcus supportive but helpless, Vivian furious and exposed. "You want to know what I think Grandma Rose would say?" Maya's voice carried the ring of absolute certainty. "She'd say that any family that judges a man by his bank account instead of his character isn't worth keeping. She'd say that love shared is worth more than wealth hoarded. And she'd tell me to run from people who try to poison my happiness with their own disappointment." David's chair scraped back as he slowly stood, his movement drawing every eye in the room. His face was calm, but Maya could see the storm building behind his eyes. Not hurt, but something far more dangerous. The quiet fury of someone who had finally seen enough. The moment stretched taut as a wire about to snap. Maya realized she was holding her breath, waiting to see what would happen when David finally, inevitably spoke. David's voice, when it finally came, was quiet. Deceptively calm. The kind of quiet that preceded earthquakes. "Enough." The single word carried such weight that the entire room fell silent. Even Vivian, her face still flushed with anger, seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted. David stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator deciding whether to strike. "You want to talk about worth?" His voice remained soft, but there was steel beneath the silk. "About what Maya deserves? About practical considerations and security?" Maya watched in fascination, and growing alarm as David's carefully maintained facade began to crack. This wasn't the mild-mannered tech consultant her family thought they'd been dismissing all evening. This was someone else entirely. Someone with authority, with power, with the kind of presence that commanded rooms full of people. "David," Maya whispered, suddenly understanding what was about to happen. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His eyes found hers across the table, and she saw love there, fierce and protective. "I've listened to them tear you apart for 3 hours. I've watched them use your grandmother's memory as a weapon against you. I've heard them suggest that you're naive, that you're settling, that you don't know your own worth." His voice grew harder. "Enough." He turned back to the family, and Maya saw her father lean back involuntarily, as if recognizing something dangerous. "You want to know about my little tech company?" David's smile was sharp as broken glass. "My little tech company is Kim Tech Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it?" The silence that followed was absolute. Maya watched the color drain from her mother's face, saw Vivian's eyes widen in shock, witnessed Robert's mouth fall open in pure disbelief. Even Marcus, who had been supportive all evening, stared at David as if seeing him for the first time. Kim Tech Industries. The company that had revolutionized cloud computing architecture. The company whose initial public offering had been the largest tech IPO in 5 years. The company that, according to Forbes, had made its founder, David Kim, one of the youngest billionaires in America. "That's impossible," Vivian breathed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" David's tone remained conversational, but his eyes were ice. "You assumed that because I wore an off-the-rack suit and drove a modest car, I must be poor. You judged my worth by surface appearances and decided I wasn't good enough for Maya." He paused, letting that sink in. "You were wrong about my bank account, but you were right about one thing. I'm not good enough for Maya. No one is. She's extraordinary." Linda found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "But why?" "Mate, why didn't you say anything?" "Because Maya asked me not to." David's voice softened as he looked at her. "She wanted to come home and be loved for who she is. Not what her fiancé could provide. She wanted to see if her family had changed, if they could accept her choices without needing external validation." He turned back to the family, and his expression hardened again. "She chose her grandmother's ring specifically because it represents something you clearly don't understand. Love that exists independent of monetary value. Love that doesn't need to be proven with price tags." "David," Robert's voice was hoarse with shock, "we had no idea." "No idea that I was wealthy?" "No. But you had every idea that you were being cruel." David's words cut through Robert's attempted apology like a sword. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you spent 3 hours systematically tearing down the woman I love. When you told her she was naive, settling, making poor choices." Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't sure if they were from relief, vindication, or heartbreak. Because David was right, it shouldn't have taken wealth to make her family treat her with respect. The revelation of his success was satisfying, but it also proved everything she'd feared about their conditional love. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Maya chose that ring," David continued, his voice carrying absolute conviction, "because she's wise enough to know that what matters isn't what you can afford to give someone, but what you're willing to sacrifice for them. That ring represents 47 years of partnership, of building something together through poverty and plenty, sickness and health. It's worth more than any diamond ever could be." Vivian had gone completely silent, her face ashen. The woman who had spent the evening attacking David's supposed poverty now faced the reality that she'd been publicly humiliating a billionaire, and more importantly, that her cruelty had been witnessed and catalogued by someone with the power to make her social humiliation complete. "But the way you spoke to her tonight," David's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "The way you made her doubt herself, question her choices, feel ashamed of choosing love over luxury, That was unforgivable. Marcus was the first to find his voice. Maya, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. That he was rich? Maya's voice was thick with unshed tears. Would it have mattered if he wasn't Marcus? Would you have treated him differently if he really was just a tech consultant making $40,000 a year? The question hung in the air unanswered, because they all knew the truth. Her family's respect was conditional on net worth, their love dependent on status, their acceptance tied to achievement measured in dollars and social position. I think, David said quietly, we should go. Wait! Linda's voice was desperate now, her carefully constructed social order crumbling around her. Please, we can. We need to talk about this. We made a mistake. You made many mistakes, David corrected. But the biggest one was thinking that Maya needed your approval to be happy. She doesn't. She never did. He moved around the table to Maya's side, his hand gentle on her back. Are you ready to leave? Maya looked around the table one last time. At her mother, whose love came with conditions. At her aunt, whose bitterness had poisoned the evening. At her father, whose silence had enabled the cruelty. At Marcus, whose support had come too late to matter. I'm ready, she whispered. As they moved toward the door, Linda's voice followed them, high and desperate. Maya, please, we love you, we just want what's best. Maya stopped, turned back one final time. If you loved me, you wouldn't have spent tonight trying to convince me I was making a mistake. If you wanted what was best for me, you would have celebrated my happiness instead of attacking it. She looked down at her grandmother's ring, its simple silver band catching the light from the chandelier. Grandma Rose knew what love looked like. She would have welcomed David with open arms, billionaire or not, because she understood that the only wealth that matters is the wealth of the heart. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving the Chen family to contemplate the wreckage of their own making. Outside, the mountain air was clean and cold, washing away the oppressive atmosphere of the dining room. Maya leaned against David's shoulder as they walked to the car, feeling simultaneously drained and liberated. The evening had gone exactly as she'd feared it would, but also exactly as she'd needed it to, because now she knew, with absolute certainty, where she stood. I'm sorry, she whispered against his chest. For what? For putting you through that. For making you sit there and listen to them. Maya. His voice was gentle as he tilted her chin up to look at him. I would sit through 1,000 dinners like that for you. What I won't do is let anyone, family or not, make you doubt your worth. She kissed him then, there in the shadow of the estate that had never truly been her home, tasting salt from her own tears, and feeling more loved than any diamond could ever make her feel. The ring caught the moonlight as they drove away, its simple beauty unchanged by revelations or recriminations. It had done exactly what Maya had hoped it would do, shown her family's true nature and proven that real love needed no validation beyond itself. The silence in the Chen dining room stretched like a live wire after Maya and David's departure. The crystal chandelier cast the same warm light, the orchids still perfumed the air with their subtle fragrance, but everything felt different, smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what had just transpired. Linda stared at the closed door, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. The Bordeaux that had tasted crisp and sophisticated an hour ago now seemed bitter on her tongue. Around the table, her family sat frozen in a tableau of shock and dawning comprehension. Kimtech Industries, Robert whispered, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. My God, Linda, do you know what we've done? Linda's laugh was brittle, edged with hysteria. What we've done? We protected our daughter from what we thought was a mistake. How were we supposed to know? Know what? Marcus's voice cut through his mother's rationalizations like a blade. Know that he was rich? Would that have changed anything? His young face was pale with disgust. We spent 3 hours torturing Maya because her fiancé didn't look wealthy enough for us. 3 hours. Vivian had yet to speak, her face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. The magnitude of her social miscalculation was beginning to sink in. She had publicly humiliated not just any man, but one of the most powerful tech entrepreneurs in the country. Her mind raced through the implications, the charitable boards they both sat on, the social circles where this story would spread like wildfire, the complete destruction of her carefully cultivated reputation. "We didn't know," she finally managed, her voice hollow. "We didn't want to know," Marcus corrected harshly. "Maya tried to tell us about him, about how much she loved him, about what kind of man he was. But all we cared about was his job title and his clothes and that stupid ring." Linda flinched as if struck. "That ring? God, that ring! She chose it specifically to test us, didn't she? To see if we'd love her regardless of appearances." Her voice cracked. "And we failed. Completely." Robert pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. He walked to the window, staring out at the circular driveway, where Maya's modest Honda had been parked just minutes before. The space looked accusingly empty now. "She's not coming back," he said quietly. "After tonight, she's not coming back." The simple statement hit the room like a physical blow. Linda's composure finally cracked completely, tears streaming down her cheeks and ruining her perfectly applied makeup. "She has to. She's our daughter. This is her family." "Is it?" Marcus stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "Because family doesn't do what we did tonight. Family doesn't spend an entire evening systematically destroying someone's confidence because they made choices we don't understand." Vivian found her voice, though it came out smaller than her usual commanding tone. "We were trying to protect her." "From what?" Marcus rounded on his aunt with unexpected fury. "From happiness? From love? From a man who clearly adores her?" His voice broke with emotion. "Did you see his face when he defended her? Did you see how he looked at her?" The image was burned into all their minds. David's quiet fury, the absolute conviction in his voice when he spoke about Maya's worth, the protective way he'd moved to her side. They had witnessed love in its purest form and had spent the evening trying to destroy it. Robert turned from the window, his face haggard. "I built this empire for her. For all of you. Everything I worked for was supposed to give my children better lives, more opportunities." His voice was thick with regret. "Instead, I taught her that love comes with conditions, that worth is measured in dollars." "We all did," Linda whispered. "Oh God, Robert, what have we become?" Vivian was crying now too, silent tears that spoke of deeper wounds than social embarrassment. "She was right about me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I am bitter. I am jealous. My marriage failed because I chose money over love, and I couldn't stand to watch her choose differently." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Marcus looked around the table at his family, at his broken mother, his devastated father, his aunt finally confronting her own demons, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. "We have to fix this," he said firmly. "Somehow, we have to make this right." "How?" Linda's voice was raw with pain. "How do you apologize for 3 years of disapproval? For an evening of cruelty? For showing your daughter that your love comes with price tags attached?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But we have to try. Maya deserves that much. She deserves a real apology, not excuses or justifications." Robert returned to the table, his movement heavy with exhaustion. "David will never forgive us. A man with his resources, his influence. We've made an enemy of someone who could destroy us socially, professionally." "This isn't about him," Marcus said sharply. "This is about Maya. About our family. About whether we're capable of change or if we're just going to sit here feeling sorry for ourselves." Vivian looked up, her mascara streaking her cheeks in dark rivers. "She won't want to see me. After what I said about Rose, about her choices, she'll never forgive me." "Maybe not," Marcus said bluntly. "Maybe we've lost her forever. But we still have to try. We owe her that much." Linda stared down at her hands, at the expensive rings that suddenly felt heavy and meaningless. "I need to call her. I need to—" "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "Not tonight. Tonight we let her have peace. Tonight we figure out how to become the family she deserved to have all along." The chandelier continued to cast its warm light over the debris of their Thanksgiving dinner, the abandoned plates of cold lamb, the wine glasses half full of vintage Bordeaux, the centerpiece that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. All of it meaningless now, revealed as the hollow symbols of wealth without wisdom they had always been. Outside, the mountain wind rustled through the perfectly manicured gardens, carrying with it the scent of change. Inside the Chen dining room, a family sat in the wreckage of their own making, finally beginning to understand the difference between having everything and having what mattered. The empty chairs where Maya and David had sat seemed to watch them, silent witnesses to the choice they now faced: remain the people who had driven away their daughter, or find the courage to become worthy of her love. The clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, marking not just the late hour but the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. Whether that new chapter would include Maya remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, the Chen family was finally seeing themselves clearly, and the reflection was far from flattering. The reckoning had begun. The inn-room felt like a sanctuary after the battlefield of the Chen estate. Maya sat cross-legged on the bed, still wearing her simple black dress, her grandmother's ring catching the soft lamplight as she turned it slowly around her finger. The familiar gesture had always brought her comfort, but tonight it carried the weight of vindication mixed with profound sadness. David stood by the window, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, watching the distant lights of the estate where they'd left her family to contemplate the wreckage of their own making. His reflection in the glass looked older somehow, as if the evening had aged him in ways that years of business battles never had. "You didn't have to do that," Maya said quietly, though her voice carried no regret. "Reveal who you are, I mean." David turned from the window, his expression soft with understanding. "Yes, I did. I couldn't watch them tear you apart anymore." He sat beside her on the bed, careful not to crowd her in this moment when she needed space to process. "Though I hate that it took my net worth to make them listen." Maya's laugh was bitter. "That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? Not their cruelty. I expected that. But the fact that they'll probably call tomorrow, full of apologies and sudden respect, because now they know you're successful by their standards." She pulled her knees to her chest, feeling suddenly small despite the evening's victory. "Do you know what my first thought was when you stood up? Relief. Not because you defended me, but because finally, I had proof that I was worth something in their eyes." David's hand found hers, his thumb tracing gently over her knuckles. "You were always worth everything, Maya. Their inability to see that says nothing about you and everything about them." Maya closed her eyes, letting herself drift back to memories that felt both distant and immediate. "I used to sit in this exact position in my childhood bedroom, wearing this ring and talking to Grandma Rose like she was still alive. Especially after the fights with Mom about my future, about why I wouldn't join the family business." She could almost smell Rose's lavender perfume, hear her grandmother's accented voice speaking the wisdom born of decades and hardship. Rose came to America with nothing. Literally nothing. She worked in other people's kitchens, cleaned their houses, took in their laundry. But she was the richest person I ever knew. David listened without interrupting, understanding that Maya needed to work through this tangle of emotions and memories to find her way forward. "When I was 16, I had my first real fight with Mom about college." Maya's voice grew distant with remembering. "She wanted me to study business naturally. Follow the family path. I wanted architecture, but not the kind that builds monuments to wealth. I wanted to create homes that worked with nature, not against it." She remembered that night clearly. Linda's disappointed sighs, Robert's attempts to mediate, the growing sense that her dreams were somehow selfish, impractical. "I ran to Grandma Rose's room crying. She was so frail by then, but her hands were still strong when she held mine." Maya turned her grandmother's ring, feeling the slight imperfections in the silver that spoke of decades of wear, of love lived rather than displayed. She told me about the night Grandpa proposed. They were sitting on the fire escape of her tenement building because it was too hot inside to sleep. He'd been saving for months to buy this ring from a pawn shop. Not because he thought she needed jewelry, but because he wanted to give her something that would last. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel the summer heat, hear the sounds of the city below them as Rose described that long-ago evening. Rose said yes not because of the ring, but because of what it represented. The sacrifice, the thoughtfulness, the promise of partnership. She wore it every day for 47 years, through good times and bad, through poverty and modest prosperity. It never lost its shine for her because it was never about the silver. It was about the love. David's eyes were bright with understanding. That's why you chose it for us. I chose it because when you proposed, I saw the same thing in your eyes that Grandpa had in his. Not someone trying to impress me or buy my affection, but someone offering to build a life together. Real partnership, not transaction. Maya remembered David's proposal with crystalline clarity. They'd been hiking in the mountains, just the two of them and the vast sky. He'd knelt on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, not with a Cartier box and rehearsed speech, but with Rose's ring and simple, honest words about love and commitment, and the future they could create together. I wanted to wear it tonight specifically to test them, Maya admitted. I needed to know if they could love me, love us, without the validation of expensive gestures. If they could see value that couldn't be measured in carats or dollars. She looked around the modest inn-room with its clean lines and comfortable simplicity. This room costs $60 a night. The guest suite at the estate is probably worth more than most people's houses. But I feel more at home here than I ever did in that mansion. David understood. He'd grown up in a cramped apartment above his parents' restaurant, where love was expressed through extra dumplings in your soup and staying up late helping with homework at tables that wobbled on uneven legs. Wealth had brought him many things, but the most valuable lessons had come from those early years when family meant everything, because it was often all they had. Your grandmother would be proud of you, he said simply. Of the woman you've become, the choices you've made, the way you stood up for your values tonight. Maya felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the hurt and anger of earlier. These carried healing. I think she'd like you too. She had a gift for seeing people's true character, beneath whatever surface they presented. I would have liked to meet her. She would have fed you until you couldn't move, then insisted you take leftovers home. Maya's smile was watery but genuine. She believed food was love made tangible. Every meal was an act of caring. They sat in comfortable silence as the mountains settled into deeper darkness around them. Maya felt something shifting inside her, a sense of resolution taking shape. The evening had been painful but necessary. Like setting a broken bone, it hurt terribly but was required for proper healing. I know what I have to do, she said finally. David waited, knowing this was her decision to make. I'm going to write them a letter. Not angry or accusatory, but honest. About what tonight showed me. About what I need from them going forward. About the kind of relationship I'm willing to have. She looked down at her grandmother's ring, drawing strength from its simple presence. Rose taught me that love isn't just about feeling. It's about choosing every day to see the best in someone and to forgive their worst. But she also taught me that sometimes loving someone means setting boundaries they don't want to respect. Maya had found her answer in her grandmother's memory, in the legacy of a woman who had understood both the power and the limits of love. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and uncertain futures. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by authentic love and wearing a ring that had weathered every storm because it was built on something unshakable. The mountains stood sentinel outside their window, ancient and enduring, witnesses to the truth that some things lasted not because they were expensive, but because they were real. Maya stood at the edge of the Chen estate's circular driveway the following morning, her grandmother's ring catching the early sunlight like a beacon of resolve. She'd spent the pre-dawn hours crafting her letter, pouring 3 years of hurt and hope onto paper, but something had shifted as she wrote. Words on a page felt insufficient for this moment. This reckoning required her physical presence, her voice, her unflinching gaze. David waited by their car, giving her space while remaining close enough to offer support if needed. He'd suggested she handle this alone, understanding that some battles belonged to the person who'd been wounded. But his steady presence anchored her as she walked toward the front door of the house that had never quite felt like home. The door opened before she could knock. Linda stood there, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from what had clearly been a sleepless night. Behind her, Maya could see Robert pacing in the foyer, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in urgent, hushed tones. "Maya." Linda's voice cracked on her daughter's name. "Thank God. I've been. Please come in. We need to talk." "Yes," Maya said simply. "We do." The living room felt different in daylight, less imposing somehow. The expensive furnishings that had seemed so overwhelming the night before now looked like what they were: beautiful objects that couldn't fill the hollow spaces in human relationships. Marcus sat hunched on the silk sofa, his young face etched with exhaustion and guilt. "Where's Vivian?" Maya asked, her tone carefully neutral. "She left early this morning," Robert said, ending his phone call and joining them. "She was distraught. Ashamed, I think, though she'd never admit it directly." Maya nodded, unsurprised. Vivian's cruelty had always been rooted in her own pain, but that didn't excuse it. Her aunt's absence actually made this easier. Vivian wasn't ready for the conversation Maya needed to have. "Maya, sweetheart," Linda began, her voice tremulous with desperate hope. "We owe you such an enormous apology. We had no idea about David, about his success." "Stop." Maya's voice was calm but firm. "Right there. Stop." Linda fell silent, startled by the authority in her daughter's tone. "You're going to apologize for not knowing David was wealthy?" Maya looked around the room at her family. Her broken mother, her ashamed father, her guilt-stricken brother. "That's exactly the problem. That's exactly what I came here to address." She moved to the center of the room, feeling the weight of 3 generations of Chen family expectations pressing down on her. But Rose's ring on her finger reminded her that some expectations were worth meeting, others worth shattering completely. "Last night you spent 3 hours systematically attacking the man I love because you judged him by his clothes, his car, his job title. You made me question my own worth because my engagement ring wasn't expensive enough. You used Grandma Rose's memory as a weapon against the very values she taught me." Maya's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed with the fire of someone who had finally found her courage. "And now you want to apologize because you discovered he's rich? As if his net worth changes anything about your behavior?" "We made a mistake," Robert said quietly. "A terrible mistake. We judged him. Judged both of you. Unfairly. You made a choice, Dad. A deliberate choice to value appearance over character, wealth over worth, status over substance." Maya turned to face him fully. "The same choice you've been making my entire life." The words hit like physical blows. Robert staggered slightly, his face pale with recognition. "When I was 12, you missed my school play because you had a business dinner with potential investors. When I was 16, you told me my environmental architecture dreams were, quote, impractical. When I graduated summa cum laude, the first thing you asked was whether I'd reconsidered joining the family business." Maya's voice grew stronger with each example, years of suppressed hurt finally given voice. "Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of my life has been measured against your definition of success. Love in this family comes with conditions, and I'm done meeting them." Linda was crying openly now, her composed facade completely shattered. "We love you, Maya, we do. You want me to be who you think I should be, not who I am." Maya's interruption was gentle but implacable. "You love an idea of me, a version that makes choices you approve of, but you don't love me." "That's not true," Marcus said desperately, rising from the sofa. "Maya, I love you. I've always loved you exactly as you are." Maya's expression softened as she looked at her brother. "I know you do, Marcus. And that gives me hope. But loving someone means defending them when they're being attacked, even by family. Especially by family." Marcus flinched as if struck, understanding the truth in her words. He'd remained largely silent the night before, uncomfortable, but unwilling to take a stand until it was too late. "I'm setting boundaries," Maya continued, her voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship, it starts with accepting my choices without condition. David and I are getting married. I'm wearing Grandma Rose's ring, and it's perfect. My career building sustainable homes matters, whether it makes millions or not." She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the crucial condition. "And any future relationship between us will be based on mutual respect, not family obligation. I won't subject myself or David to another evening like last night ever again." Robert stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a gesture of desperate appeal. "Maya, please, give us a chance to make this right. We can change. We can learn to—" "Can you?" Maya's question cut through his plea like a blade. "Can you really, Dad? Because change isn't just saying you're sorry. It's fundamentally altering how you see the world, how you measure worth, how you express love." She looked around the room one final time, seeing not the trappings of wealth but the faces of people she'd once trusted with her heart. "I hope you can change. I genuinely do, because I'd like to have a family that celebrates love instead of questioning it, that builds people up instead of tearing them down." Maya moved toward the door, feeling lighter with each step, despite the weight of what she was leaving behind. "When you're ready to love me unconditionally, really ready, not just sorry you got caught judging poorly, you know where to find me." "Maya, wait!" Linda's voice broke on a sob. Maya turned back one last time, her hand resting on the doorframe. "I'll be wearing this ring when you call, Mom. The same ring I wore last night. If you can tell me it's beautiful because it represents love rather than apologizing for it not being expensive enough, then maybe we can start over." She stepped into the morning sunlight, leaving her family to contemplate the choice she'd laid before them. Behind her, she could hear Linda's broken crying, Marcus's quiet words of comfort, Robert's heavy footsteps pacing the marble floor. David was waiting beside their car, his face reflecting both pride and sorrow at what this moment had cost her. "How do you feel?" he asked as she reached him. Maya looked back at the estate one final time, then at the ring that had started this entire reckoning. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." As they drove away, Maya realized she'd finally done what her grandmother would have been proud of. She'd chosen love over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, truth over peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. 2 weeks passed in silence. Maya threw herself into her work, finalizing plans for the sustainable housing development that would become her signature project. The irony wasn't lost on her. While her family questioned the profitability of environmental design, she was creating something that would house 50 families in homes that worked with nature rather than against it. David watched her with quiet pride as she refined elevation drawings and calculated solar panel arrays, understanding that work had always been her refuge when emotions ran too deep for words. On a Tuesday morning, as November frost painted delicate patterns on their apartment windows, Maya's phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and she stared at it for 3 full rings before answering. "Maya?" His voice was tentative, younger somehow than his 24 years. "Can we talk, please? Not about all of it, just, I miss you." The simple honesty in his words nearly undid her careful composure. "I miss you too," she admitted quietly. They met at a small cafe downtown, far from the family estate and its weight of expectations. Marcus looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, as if the family reckoning had aged him in ways his privileged life never had. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Mom hasn't left her room in 3 days, he said without preamble, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup like an anchor. "Dad's been working 18-hour days, which you know means he's avoiding dealing with emotions. And Aunt Vivian," he shook his head. "She's telling people she has the flu, but I think she's just too embarrassed to face anyone." Maya felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy, but she pushed it down. "I'm sorry they're hurting, Marcus, but I meant what I said." "I know you did, and you were right to say it." His voice carried a conviction that surprised her. "Maya, I've been thinking about everything. Really thinking. About how we treated you. About how we treated David. About what kind of family we've become. He leaned forward, his eyes intense with newfound understanding. Do you remember when I was 8 and broke Dad's golf trophy? The one from his first big development deal? Maya nodded, remembering the incident vividly. Marcus had been playing indoor baseball despite explicit warnings, and his line drive had shattered the Crystal Award that Robert displayed prominently in his study. You took the blame, Marcus continued. Told them you'd been dusting and knocked it over accidentally. You let them ground you for 2 weeks to protect me from Dad's disappointment. You were 8, and you were 14, but that's not the point. Marcus's voice grew stronger. The point is that you've been protecting this family's feelings for years, while we systematically tore you down. You've been more of a real family member to us than we've ever been to you. The words hit deeper than Maya expected. She'd never thought of her actions that way, as protection rather than simple sisterly love. But Marcus was right. She'd spent years shielding her family from uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. I need you to know that I've been calling Dad out, Marcus said, his voice carrying a determination Maya had never heard before. About the business dinners he prioritized over your achievements. About the way he dismissed your career choices. About the money lecture he gave you when you turned down the family business. Maya's eyes widened. Marcus challenging their father was unprecedented. Robert had always been his hero, the successful patriarch to emulate. What did he say? At first, he got defensive, started explaining about providing for the family, about building security for our future. Marcus's smile was bitter, but I asked him a question that shut him up completely. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. I asked him if he'd rather have a daughter who was happy and struggling, or miserable and rich. Just like that. Point blank. Maya held her breath, afraid to hope for the answer she wanted to hear. He couldn't answer Maya. He just sat there for 10 minutes, staring at his hands. Then he started crying. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I've never seen Dad cry before. Not when Grandma Rose died, not when his father passed. But he cried for you. For what he'd done to you. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Robert Chen, the man who'd built an empire through calculated decisions and emotional control, had broken down when forced to confront the cost of his priorities. He's been trying to write you a letter, Marcus continued. Must have started it 50 times. The study's covered with crumpled drafts. He keeps saying he doesn't know how to apologize for 27 years of getting it wrong. Maya felt tears threatening, but these carried a complexity of emotion she couldn't untangle. Grief for the relationship they could have had, hope for what might still be possible, and a deep, abiding sadness for the pain they'd all caused each other. And Mom? Marcus's expression grew troubled. Mom's harder. She keeps saying she was protecting you, that she knows what it's like to struggle financially, and didn't want that for you. She's convinced herself that questioning David's worth was actually maternal love. Even after learning who he really is, especially after learning who he really is, Marcus shook his head in frustration. She keeps saying it proves her point, that you deserve someone successful, that she was right to worry. She doesn't understand that his success was never the issue. Maya wasn't surprised. Linda's worldview had been constructed over decades of believing that security came through status, that love could be measured in material terms. Dismantling those beliefs would require more than a single revelation. But there's something else, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Yesterday, she went up to Grandma Rose's old room, the one we've kept exactly as she left it. She was up there for hours. Maya's breath caught. Rose's room had been preserved like a shrine since her death. Her books still on the nightstand, her reading glasses folded carefully on her dresser, her immigrant documents framed on the wall as reminders of how far the family had come. When she came down, she was carrying something. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth by age and handling. She wanted me to give this to you. Maya recognized the box immediately. It had sat on Rose's dresser for decades, holding the few pieces of jewelry her grandmother had treasured. With trembling hands, Maya opened it to find a delicate gold locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Inside the locket was a photograph. Rose and her husband on their wedding day, young and hopeful and radiantly happy despite their obvious poverty. Rose wore a simple white dress that had clearly been borrowed or bought secondhand, and her engagement ring was the only jewelry visible. But their faces shone with such pure joy, such absolute certainty in their love, that the photograph seemed to glow from within. A note was tucked beneath the locket, written in Linda's careful script. "I finally understand what your grandmother was trying to teach us, what you've been trying to teach us. Love isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that your ring is perfect because it represents something real, something that lasts." Maya stared at the note through blurring tears, feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was recognition that change, real change, might actually be possible. "She wants to see you," Marcus said quietly. "When you're ready. Not to apologize again, but to ask how she can learn to be the mother you deserve." For the first time in 2 weeks, Maya felt hope stirring alongside her resolve. The road to healing would be long and difficult, requiring fundamental changes from people set in their ways for decades. But her grandmother's locket pressed warm against her palm, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was with the people you loved most. 6 months later, Maya stood in the gardens of the sustainable housing development, her grandmother's ring catching the spring sunlight as she reviewed the final inspection reports. The first families would move into their solar-powered, earth-friendly homes next month. 50 units that proved environmental consciousness and profitability could coexist beautifully. David watched from the project office window, his smile visible even at this distance as he saw her animated conversation with the lead contractor about rainwater collection systems. Today was also their wedding day. The ceremony would be small, held in the community garden at the center of the development. Maya had insisted on simplicity, folding chairs borrowed from the local church, flowers from her own garden, a potluck reception where guests would share food and stories rather than expensive gifts. Everything her family's Thanksgiving dinner hadn't been: authentic, unpretentious, focused on connection rather than impression. "Maya?" A familiar voice called from behind her, tentative but hopeful. She turned to find Robert approaching, dressed in a simple navy suit rather than his usual designer armor. In his hands, he carried a small wrapped package and an expression of nervous uncertainty that she'd never seen on his face before. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had been rebuilt slowly, carefully, like architects laying a new foundation stone by stone. "Dad." Her smile was genuine, earned through months of difficult conversations and gradual change. "You came. I wouldn't miss it. Though I have to admit, I'm nervous." His laugh was self-deprecating. "I've given presentations to Fortune 500 boards, but walking my daughter down the aisle terrifies me." Maya understood his nervousness. Their reconciliation had been fragile, built on Robert's genuine efforts to understand her values and support her choices without condition. He'd started small, asking about her projects without offering business advice, listening to her environmental concerns without dismissing them as impractical. Most importantly, he'd begun talking to David as an equal, rather than evaluating him as a potential son-in-law. "This is for you," Robert said, offering the package. "Something I should have given you years ago." Inside was a leather portfolio containing architectural drawings, detailed plans for low-income housing that bore her father's signature. But these weren't his usual luxury developments. These were modest, efficient homes designed with environmental sustainability in mind. "I don't understand," Maya said, studying the plans with growing amazement. "These were my first designs," Robert explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Before the money, before the empire, before I forgot why I became an architect in the first place, I wanted to build homes for people like my parents, immigrants who needed affordable housing that didn't sacrifice dignity for economy." Maya looked up from the drawings, seeing her father with new eyes. "What happened to these plans?" "I got successful. Started believing that bigger meant better, that expensive meant valuable." His voice carried decades of regret. "I built monuments to wealth instead of homes for families. I lost myself somewhere along the way, and I taught you the wrong definition of success." He gestured toward the sustainable development around them. But you found your way back to what matters. You're building the future I dreamed of before I got distracted by profit margins. Maya felt tears threatening as she looked at the careful drawings, evidence of dreams her father had abandoned but never truly forgotten. Why are you showing me this now? Because I want to fund your next project. Not as an investor looking for returns, but as your father who finally understands what you're building. Robert's voice was steady with conviction. I want to help you create more developments like this one, places where families can thrive without destroying the earth. The offer took Maya's breath away. Not because of the money. David's success meant they didn't need financial backing, but because it represented her father's complete transformation. The man who had once dismissed environmental architecture as impractical was offering to make it his legacy. There's one condition, Robert added quickly, seeing her expression. We do it your way. Your designs, your values, your vision. I'm not trying to take over. I'm asking to be part of something meaningful again. Before Maya could respond, more familiar voices called her name. Marcus appeared around the corner of the community center, his arm around a young woman Maya had heard about but never met. His girlfriend Sarah, a social worker who had apparently helped him understand the importance of purpose over profit. Behind them came Linda, walking slowly but steadily, her usual designer ensemble replaced by a simple dress in Maya's favorite shade of blue. The past 6 months had been hardest for Linda, requiring her to examine beliefs she'd held for decades. But she was here, and that meant everything. The photographer wants some pictures before the ceremony, Linda said, her voice carefully controlled. The distance between them had narrowed considerably, but it remained, a reminder that some wounds healed slowly, requiring patience and sustained effort. Of course, Maya replied, then surprised herself by adding, I'm glad you're here, Mom. Linda's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. I almost didn't come. I was afraid you'd changed your mind about wanting me here after. Everything. I haven't changed my mind, but I haven't forgotten either. Maya's honesty was gentle but clear. We're still learning how to be family to each other. I know, and I'm grateful for the chance to learn. Linda reached out hesitantly, touching Maya's hand where it wore Rose's ring. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become, of the choices you've made, the life you've built. For the first time in Maya's memory, Linda spoke of the ring without apologizing for it, without suggesting it should be different. The simple acceptance felt like a miracle. As they walked toward the community center where David waited with the officiant, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd walked away from her family's conditional love, choosing authenticity over acceptance. Now she was walking toward a future where love didn't require performance, where worth wasn't measured in dollars, where family meant people who celebrated your happiness instead of questioning it. The sun streamed through the trees as guests took their seats. Friends who had supported her dreams, colleagues who respected her work, and family members who were learning to love without conditions. David stood at the simple arch they'd built together from branches and wildflowers, his face bright with joy as he watched her approach. Maya's grandmother's ring caught the light one final time as she joined hands with the man who had seen her worth from the beginning, surrounded by people who had learned to see it too. Some families were born, others were chosen, but the best ones, like the strongest buildings, were constructed carefully, intentionally, with love as their foundation and authenticity as their cornerstone. The ring that had tested everything had ultimately proven what Rose had always known. Real love needed no validation beyond itself, and the most valuable things in life could never be bought, only built, one choice at a time, by people brave enough to choose truth over comfort, connection over convenience, and love over everything else. As Maya said "I do" in a voice that carried the conviction of someone who had finally learned her own worth, the mountain breeze carried the scent of new beginnings across the garden, where two people committed to building something lasting together, just like the ring that had started it all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.